Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson, and I'm joined by Duncan Palamourdas. It's Philosophical Friday. Duncan, how you doing, sir?
Good, good. Hello, hello. How's life?
Life is good. Life is good. No complaints. Released a Wolf update video this week and podcast on YouTube with good news and good graphs. So,
Beautiful.
I'm just going to take a few days to savor the progress before I start having an existential breakdown trying to help everybody.
I like it. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of
Savory
those.
is good.
Savor is good, absolutely. It's one of those things, you make progress and then you want to savor, but then you're like, you know what, I want some more progress, right?
Mm,
And it's like it's one of those things that we're never really satisfied
no,
for more
but
progress, but I know what you
it,
mean.
it's easy for me to not savor. It's
Yep.
easy for me to
Mhm.
keep chugging along to the next problem
Mhm.
that needs to be solved and not just taking a moment to be like, wow, we've come such a long way. This is really incredible. Feels really good.
Indeed, indeed. And incidentally, since it's Philosophical Friday, let's talk just a little bit about that before we go into the main topic. The idea of again, we have the proximity principle. We talk about sometime from time to time. The idea that we tend to our attention tends to be grabbed by things that happen to us close to us, both temporally and spatially, right? So things which are close to us in space and in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But talk about that idea, the idea that sometimes, in order to understand progress, sometimes you have to go further back in the before and after pictures, so to speak.
Um, I don't know. I'm not sure that I exactly understand the question here.
Like how,
Um,
let me, okay, this may, let me rephrase it. How would you say, um, how can you escape the proximity principle? What is your version of escaping the proximity principle so that you can see the progress in the long run, right? Because progress is very difficult to see
yeah.
from day to day. Like you don't gain, like, let's say 10 pounds of muscle overnight. You don't gain skill in poker
Okay, I
overnight,
see what
right?
you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just for me, it's just data sets. Like it's
Right.
just seeing data sets like over the course of a week, over the course of a month, over the
Right.
course of 3 months, and then like comparing current data sets with past data sets and filtering and looking at like how different spots are being played and what the win rate is, etc. So like that's really what it is for me is like just when you have a bunch of players and who are putting in volume, you
Mm-hmm.
can look at databases relatively quickly and adjust relatively fast. So yeah, it's just letting the results pour in, looking at
Absolutely.
my spreadsheet and seeing how people are doing on a daily basis, and then being like, wow, there's not one losing player this month. That's got to be a good sign. Um,
Absolutely. And
so
let
yeah,
me let me
that's
let me paraphrase it a little bit because I
yeah.
think it's incredibly useful. So what I'm hearing two important things. One is go back in time, but
Hmm.
also outsourcing in the form of notes, right? So use the data points, like make sure you save, which computers do automatically these days, but make sure you save those data somewhere, like it's
Yeah,
whether it's the cloud, whether it's note taking, whether it is. So outsource this so that you don't have to worry it to be in the back of your head, and then go back and look at it so you can
yeah,
actually see this whole process, which
yeah.
I
And I
do.
get I've also outsourced like the aggregation of results too.
Mm-hmm,
Like I
mm-hmm,
get
sure.
my assistant shows me a report in the morning of how people are doing. So I'm
Right,
like always on top of things. And then I have like aggregated for the month. And
right.
yeah, so just staying on top of everything. But my big goal is a million hand data set
Mm-hmm.
of winning 10 BBs per 100. Like
Okay.
that to me is like achievement unlocked
Yep.
type of situation. That's what I'm aiming for.
That's good.
And that would be, yeah, that'd be killer. But
Yep.
I don't have that yet.
Yeah,
But
no, I
it's
know.
something to strive for, right? It's that's where the future progress hopefully
Sure,
takes us.
sure.
Um, but yeah, very, very, very happy today. And
I like
yeah,
that.
speaking of coaching and tracking and analyzing,
Mm-hmm.
um, let's talk about the topic of the day.
Absolutely. So we were thinking of diving into the world of coaching. What exactly is coaching? It's not particularly obvious, right? And what goes into it, what makes for a good student, what makes for a good coach, can everybody be a coach, can everybody be a student, this type of thing, like we can try and dive in. And why don't we, start right away? How would you define coaching? And I guess to just phrase that question a little bit more specifically, when we were in school and, we would help each other, do our homeworks and things like that. Would that fall under the definition of coaching, helping each other sometimes like at the peer level, or does it have to be a difference in experience? In your own words, what is really coaching in your mind?
I think definitely it can be at the peer level, right?
Mm-hmm.
To me, coaching is problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
It's problem identification, problem solving, and then coming up with, basically communicating in such a way where the student can fill in the gaps from problem to solution,
Mm-hmm.
and understand the necessary steps
Mm-hmm.
from problem to solution, and then can replicate it, right? So like, it's just identifying problems, helping them see the right path.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, it's like there's some like coaching, if you
Right.
will,
Sure.
in that process of like asking questions that help them arrive at the right path. But I think that like it's always better to have your student get there on their own,
Mm-hmm.
solve the problem on their own without it being like spoon fed. And
So
yeah, it's just
speaking of spoon feeding, do you think that coaching is closer to a good form of manipulation to get the student in the right place, or more it's closer to co-discovery?
I mean, I think co-discovery is part of it. That to me is like the most fun part, is co-discovery,
Mm-hmm.
personally. Right. But I do also think it's like a good form of manipulation. And I would say that there is some spoon feeding stuff too. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are just things that like somebody makes a giant pre-flop error. You just have to tell them like, yo, this loses money. You don't get to limp under the gun with 7 deuce off, right? Like obviously this is going to lose money, and that needs to be like spoon fed. And then like, I guess even there's a problem, and you can still talk to them about like how to get to where like, yeah, this is not a hand that is going to make money when you limp with it under the gun. But yeah, that to me would be coaching. And I think it could be done peer to peer. It could be done at really any level. I don't think that it needs to come from someone who's even a better poker player than the other person. Like I think that anybody can help another person learn.
Actually, I think this is very important. I think that you don't even have to be better than the person that you're coaching. I think that's a very fundamental, as long as the information flow is proper. And but we'll definitely get back to this, because that's an important thing. If the coach has to be a better player than the student. But before we go there, about spoon feeding. Do you think that it's long-term viable? Like if you're spoon feeding somebody, like they can have good results, or this is only for short term?
I think it's long-term viable.
Okay.
Depends on the framework, depends on the situation. But there are definitely situations that are spoon feedable. I don't know if that's a word, but we're going to make it a word today on Philosophical Friday.
For sure. Yes. No, because I definitely have my doubts about spoon feeding in particular. And I have an issue because it as it relates to meta humility. And there's two issues there. The number one is the assumption that the person who's forcing somebody to do something makes the meta assumption that they know better than the other person, which is not always the case, especially if the other person keeps pushing back and keeps doing the same mistakes.
Sure.
And the second issue is that I don't think it addresses the why. Like, why is somebody keep doing the same thing? And again, it comes down to compatibility of disagreement, which I know you disagree with, but it's something that, or you're trolling me for.
Well, no, I'm not trolling you. I've seen, yeah. I just have, I've accumulated enough evidence through selling courses and looking at data and just seeing these types of situations that occur
Right.
somewhat frequently where I could just tell someone like just do this here and it will make
Right.
money. Like
Right.
period. Now, will it be optimal? Probably not. Will there be areas to upgrade? Will it always stay the same as it is today? I can't. Nobody can know that either because we don't know the trajectory
Right.
of how people think about poker
Right.
moving indefinitely into the future. And I think it's a fluid thing. But I could say that, like in a specific space of time, that there are things that like they just make money if you just do them.
Right, and that's something that works. Like you do A, you get B, right? I mean, that's um, the question is whether or not these people, sort of like revert back to their bad habits, or they sort of like maintain. That's, I guess, the
Yeah, I think that in situations that are like immediately profitable,
mm-hmm.
where you get positive reinforcement very quickly, I think that just anchors them.
Right. So
And
that's the way of being convinced, basically.
yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it, right? So you sort of like get into, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So
That could backfire too, right? Like because
mhm,
variance is obviously very real, and there are some
mhm,
people that like
mhm,
in any given strategy, any given
right,
spot, the poker gods are going to shine down on some
right,
people,
right.
and the poker gods are going to strike other people down with lightning in the same exact spot over a small sample. So, there is some noise there with small sample sizes.
Absolutely. And this is something which is important for people to remember, right? I mean, given a big enough sample of people trying a certain thing, there's going to be some ones that are going to succeed, regardless of whether it's a
Sure.
long-term viable strategy, for sure.
Yeah.
So, which brings us to a next question. With problems like that, these remind us that there might be a distinction between what's noise and what's real. So I guess one question would be, is coaching necessary? Do you think that people need a form of coaching or another in order to succeed? Or
I mean, no. I
okay.
never had a coach
Okay.
for the first 15 years, like a proper coach, I guess. I had friends who were high level that I discussed poker with, which that is coaching in a sense, but not not a dedicated coach who is consistently looking at my game, consistently giving feedback. I'm meeting with them like every week, and
Right.
they're assigning homework, and they're basically leading me.
Right.
It's more
Very quickly here, would we consider, like Googling and 2+2, would we consider that a form of coaching, self-coaching?
I don't know. Maybe.
Because there's a lot of wisdom out there that can be used, and a lot of people who indirectly, they can give information. So is that some sort of like
My fear is that the quality of the information is hard to discern.
mhm,
And so, you know, I mean, I guess like there is good coaching, but I think there's also negative that
mhm,
you could read on the internet as well that can be detrimental to your game. So, I mean,
mhm,
yeah, I think that like coaching from, someone of influence in the space that you respect, like I think it's a thing. I think like reading a book and learning from a book is certainly a thing. And
mhm,
so it's like just for further proximity.
mhm. Very good. So basically, to put it in answer to that, you don't think that coaching is necessary. People can actually uh
Yeah, people can figure this out. People have been beating poker without coaching, for a very long time. I'm
right.
sure there are people who have never been coached that are beating poker today and will continue to do so in the future. Like I definitely believe that like talent in this space is a thing. There
Mhm,
are some people who are like hardwired to be
mhm.
more successful than other people at
Right.
playing games. It's just that to me just seems very clear at this stage.
In this specific type of games also, because there's a huge difference in the way people play games of perfect information like chess and poker. In particular, I've seen a lot of chess players having a lot of trouble with poker.
And I am
uh,
trash at chess. I
right,
am trash at
vice
checkers.
versa, right?
Like I played a friend of mine in checkers at an airport. Like it was when the iPads had just started coming out, and we downloaded a checkers app, and we were sitting there waiting for our flight, and he beat me 30 games in a row.
Right.
I had a piece advantage for one move in 30 games. He beat the living shit out of me again and again and again and again. It wasn't even a contest. So like my spatial recognition, those type of games, it doesn't click. I don't know why. It just doesn't resonate with me. Cards are a different thing, and they've always resonated with me for whatever reason. So yeah, the specific game definitely does matter.
Absolutely. And what would you say makes like a potential student coachable? What would you say are some of the traits of a good coachee, if you will, or a good student, let's say, more specifically?
I think that, so, Nick Howard tweeted something a while back that said that, for you to influence somebody, the first thing that they need to know is that you care. So I think that they have to trust you. They have to respect you. I think that's really the first component to having a good student. And I mean, coachable students tend to not make the same mistakes again and again and again from week in and week out. There tends to be some kind of progression. Not that they don't make mistakes, they just tend to not make the same mistakes again and again. So there's like this communication, there's problem solving, there's leading them to the solution, and then there's them replicating that on their own and not falling apart when they encounter this problem again and again and again. They fall apart at different problems, but not that specific one. So like, I think that's quite important, that they retain the information from the coaching session, from everything that I've learned about learning. We focus on learning a lot. We focus on stuffing things into our brain, but really the goal of learning things is to stave off forgetting. We don't want to forget what we learn. So, if a student is like super coachable, learns during the session, and then everything falls out of their brain and they revert back the next day, well, that's not going to make for a super great coaching student relationship, because then you're just doing the same sessions again and again, and that's not gratifying for anybody.
Or progress. It's neither gratifying or progress. Like you do.
No, and they're frustrated, right? Like the coach is frustrated. They're frustrated because they're not making progress, and so that's not a good thing.
Absolutely. The way I like to summarize it is that there are two types of bad students: those who listen to everything that you say, and those who listen to nothing that you say. So it's a very, like, my nightmare students are those who every time I say something, they take a note of everything. And my nightmare students are every time I say something, they completely ignore it and they tell me their own version of the story.
Yeah.
So, and the issue with that is, like, there's a very important issue. Like, the person who listens to everything, they actually are not trying to look for the truth themselves. They're trying to be spoon-fed. That's why I said I have issue with the idea of spoon-feeding, right? I mean, there is an active ingredient in learning where you basically just try to grab information from everywhere. You're asking those questions, you're ready to learn. That's why I said that potentially Googling can be like, you're trying to find some smarter people who've actually thought about this thing, can have that information. You try to actively find it. And the more experienced person, not the knowledgeable person, nobody's knowledgeable, we'll know nothing, right? But some people have more experience than others. So the more experienced person can actually potentially show you something you can grab onto. And then what you mentioned earlier, like, that your students, that they listen to you, they trust you, that you have that know-how, because again, you lead them to the promised land of, like, profitable spots, and they follow that. Conversely, the person who listens to nothing, right, is also problematic, because that person, again, they have their ear closed. So I find there is a fine line between, the trust but verify sort of students, right? The students who are going to be, well, Duncan, yeah, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying about limping, but what if I wanted to experiment and limp? To which my answer would be, thank God, please do limp. Please ignore the initiative. Please ignore the trifecta, please. And then try to see why you think it works or it doesn't work. Please try to contradict me. Like, it's very important. Just don't try to contradict me all the time, so that we can actually have a conversation going up somewhere.
Yeah. And something important too about coachable students is, in my experience, they ask very good questions. So like, they ask very good high-level questions because they're looking to build on what we're learning, and they're looking to make more connections. in their brain, right? Like really, they're just like, they have a foundation, and then they ask good questions that allow them to like chain out and learn more and grow.
Right.
So I think like high level questions are another good sign that the student is coachable and we're making progress together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what makes for a good coach on the other side of the spectrum?
Um, I guess the first quality would be that they have to care. You know, I think I don't think there's any good coaches that don't care about their
That's right.
students. I think that like you have to be invested in them as human beings and poker players. You have to genuinely care about helping to solve their problems, because that's what gives you the, you know, the energy to invest thought into like, how do I communicate this from their paradigm? How do I communicate this in a way that makes sense? How do I drop the breadcrumbs in a way to where they'll pick them up and be able to arrive at the solution eventually, right? Because yeah, it's just, you just have to care. It's a lot of energy in the relationship. And I think that good coaches, I said it before, but they approach communication, they approach sessions from the student's paradigm. So they talk to them in the language that their student uses, so that they can understand and are able to explain it from how they think about the game. And they create good metaphors, they make good connections, they can tell good stories that resonate. Yeah, I think those are just the top level things of a good coach. And I think good coaches are like always looking to improve their craft. They're looking to hone, get better at what they do. They're looking to progress themselves.
Right. You see, this is a fundamental idea I very much agree with. And again, I'm biased, but I have to spell it out. The idea that, you know, these wordings that you're using, the idea that they care about the game, right? They try to improve themselves, right? The idea that they're trying to say how they think about the game. All of that, to me, also shows the student mentality from the perspective of the coach. Like somebody who, like, that's why sometimes I say, again, there's no such thing as a teacher. It's just a more experienced student, right? At least that's my perspective, right? So, and what you're talking about, I mean, that's the type of honesty. How does the coach think about the game? I think this is incredible, because then the student realizes that, you know, at least the coach is meta humble, right? I mean, they would be willing to say I'm wrong when they're actually wrong, or like they still have blind spots that they're aware of, blind spots they're not aware of, and all that.
Yeah, if beware a coach that has all the answers.
Of course.
Beware a coach that never says I don't know, right? Because like, you don't know everything, and there are new problems that you haven't investigated, you haven't invested energy into solving, and you're just not going to have all the answers. So like, I think that coaches should be able to say I don't know to their when they don't know, right? Like, I would rather say I don't know and then think about it and get back to them with a reasonable answer after investing thought than tell them something that could be totally wrong just because I'm afraid of saying that I don't know. Like, that seems not good.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about another thing that you touched about good coaches, the idea of communication. Let's briefly, maybe, I mean, this is probably a topic of its own. This is one of your favorite interests and one of my favorite interests as well. But let's talk a little bit about communication. What are some elements that make for a good coach in terms of communicating the ideas to the other person?
Again, I think it's using language that resonates with a student, listening to how they describe situations, listening to like how their brain makes connections and how they think about things. And then also introducing language upgrades to the student as well, I think is something that's quite important. You know, if the listener were to sit in on like a Wolves coaching session, in a lot of ways, it would be like we're speaking a different language, because we're just very precise about different lines and different things that happen and go on. So I think that like any Yeah, that's really the major parts of communication for me. Just like making sure that any abstract term that could be taken in 10 different ways is clearly defined so
Very
that
good.
we're on the same page. Asking them like, when you say something, asking the student like, what does that mean to you?
What
What
does
does
that
this
mean to
word
you?
mean?
Very
Yeah.
important. What does that mean to you? Not what does that mean, because there's no necessarily universal ways of defining
Hmm.
things. What does that mean to you? That's very, very important.
Sure.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point.
Yep.
And I actually have an example about communication, which sort of like summarizes the way I personally view communication. Because to me, it's never about transfer of knowledge, because I don't think I can transfer knowledge to anybody. It's about whether or not the other person is willing to get that knowledge or not. So, and that's why I like language that goes something like, this is how I think about the game. This is what I would do in that situation. This is why I would do this. Like things where people can actually hear and then, let process it however they want, and make the best out of it. But what I found is, I have two specific examples. One is related to chess, and it's a little bit clearer, and then one is related to poker. And as everything poker, it can be a little bit vague, but I think it's the same idea. I had a student once, a chess student of all students, who came to me, and with a lot of confidence, they declared to me. For those of you who play chess, you may know that rooks are more valuable than knights. They tend to be more important for those of you who play chess. But she came to me and she said, Duncan, you know what? Knights are better than rooks. In every game that I play, knights are more valuable than rooks. I don't find any usefulness to those rooks. Knights are better than rooks, and that's it. That's the way I view things. Now, the way I see, there's two ways you can approach this. One way you can be, you know what? Here's the data. Knights are worse than rooks, and here's the data to prove it. Blah 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 blah. You're wrong. Or there's another approach, which I favor, and that is the approach of, why do they think that?
Yeah.
What
Why?
possible? Why do they have that? Let's take a close inspection. And again, for those of you who play chess, you notice that knights actually come into the game early on, whereas rooks, because they're in the corner, they tend to actually come into the game later. That doesn't mean they're not valuable, but because they come to the game later, at the lower level of play, sometimes people their game is over before the rooks are activated, so players don't get to use them. It's very simple. You don't need to know anything about chess. Just
Hmm.
knights go into the play before. So I realized that's what's happening, and we had that discussion, and I said, it makes perfect sense. Actually, knights are more valuable than the rooks because you never move the rooks. And you're absolutely correct. So from your perspective, what are you actually saying makes sense. Now, if there's any chess player out there that will tell me, Duncan, you're insane, you can't call the knights better than the rooks. But I can, because in that specific scenario where she was not activating them, they were worth zero. It doesn't matter what the data says they should be worth. For
Yeah. I
her, they're worth zero until she actually learns how to activate them. And that's a very important, I think, point to understand, that if we were her, we would think the exact same thing.
Yeah, and I'm not a chess player
No,
at
just
all.
yeah.
But the first thing that comes to my mind from the coaching side of it is that I would ask them to pay attention to when they get in bad positions that were put in by the opponent's rooks. Or the rooks, right?
Right.
So like that's what I would ask, right?
Yeah,
Like I would say like,
absolutely.
okay, how often are they putting you in bad positions? How often are they hurting you,
Right.
right? So like pay attention to like the downside. That's the villain in this situation is like inflicting on you, because in poker, and I assume in chess, things are complementary.
Mm-hmm.
So if she didn't know how to use that piece,
That's right.
then she's also not going to know how other people are using the piece well,
Correct.
because there's like a knowledge gap there.
Absolutely. We
And
talked
in
about this,
poker,
the idea of three betting and the symmetry there. You're
yeah,
absolutely correct.
yeah, right. So yeah, that would be like, and again, I don't play chess, but
No.
that would be
This
my
is spot on.
suggestion would be to like look at it from that side of like, how often are you getting crushed by this piece and what's happening here, right? And then just put more visibility on that so that she can start saying like, oh, I see how this is like hurting me
Absolutely.
regularly.
Two things immediately come to mind. Number one, you don't need to be a chess player to understand something like this, right? Which, by the way, that was the thing that we discussed earlier, whether or not poker coaches need to be better players. So you see this thing, abstractly, and it makes perfect sense, which because you're a good coach, right? And number two, the questions that you're asking her to ask herself are all assuming that you try to be on her perspective, right? The things that you would do in her shoes, right? So that's another thing. So you're trying to be the student, you try to be in her shoes.
It's problem solving.
It's problem solving, exactly.
There's a problem, and like this is how I would go about solving the problem without knowing anything about chess.
Absolutely. And this is actually brings a segue to the next question. By the way, I will come back to the poker example that I have. I won't forget, but because it's an excellent segue.
Sure.
Do poker coaches or coaches in general have to be, better players than the players than they coach? And if not, how can we, explain the gap?
I don't think they have to be better players, but I do think they have to be good players.
Okay.
Like, I think that there are just things that a good coach, like, again, it's problem solving, right? Mm-hmm. And having someone to identify blind spots and just ask questions that allow you to solve problems on your own is just beneficial, because it's another set of eyes on what's going on. So, all Roger Federer has coaches, and he's like the best tennis player in the world. So like, like everybody has coaches that does things at exceptionally high levels, and their coaches generally are not better than them, but they are good at whatever thing they're coaching in general, I would imagine. But in poker specifically, like, I think that, I think a few things. I think that if a coach were not that good at poker, that a high level poker player would be very resistant to feedback and communication. And I think that's a perspective that just is not going to reap many fruits.
Right. That's a practical issue.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And
if I'm better than somebody at poker and they're coaching me and I know what they're saying is wrong, it's very hard. Like, there's a trust issue that starts coming into play.
Absolutely. But just to phrase it in a basic principle language, if you will, if we were to sort of like summarize it, and this is not a perfect metaphor and on a perfect analogy. We never can give perfect metaphors or analogies if we only use a couple of sentences. But one way I would personally put it is that a coach typically asks better questions than the student, but the student could very well be better at answering them.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, and the reason for that, like, you can think of a computer, right? I mean, somebody who, like, you have a student who's really good at calculating, right? But I mean, they may not have necessarily the wisdom necessary or the experience to know which calculations to make, right? So that out of all the calculations, you give them an equation, they solve it immediately, but they may not necessarily know which equation to consider, which are the right questions to get to the equation. And that's similar also human and artificial intelligence analogy, right? I mean, the computers are so good, but they don't know exactly where to go. They're very intelligent, not very wise, right? So
a lot of learning is crafting the right question.
Right.
I think a lot of high level poker playing is asking yourself the right question in the moment that helps lead you to better conclusions. But yeah, like, I think poker coaches in general, one commonality, they tend to ask very high level questions that get them closer to a solution to whatever problem is at hand.
Absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And just to like take the symmetrical part of that question before we go to the poker example. I guess we can put both of them together, though we talked about the one half. Do good players let me just rephrase. I'll get there eventually. Sorry about that, listeners. So can great players be great coaches, and can great coaches be great players? So let's take both sides at once.
Well, yeah, of course they can. Do they have to be?
Do they have to be?
No, I don't think they have to be. I think there are great poker players who are not good coaches at all. I think that it's, a different skill set It's something that needs to be learned. There's a learning curve. And I have plenty of examples of this where people who I interact with have been coached by some of the best players in the world and have not had positive experiences with said players because, they're great players, but they haven't really honed their coaching ability, their communication ability, their problem solving ability, their interaction with other human being ability, right? Like just their social skills. So yeah, I think that like great players can be terrible coaches. And I think that
sorry.
I don't know that terrible players can be great coaches in poker specifically. Yeah, I don't know that if somebody's terrible at a thing, I don't know that they can be a good coach in that thing.
Sure.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
No, that's a good, and actually on the other side, I'm going to try to push a little bit. Not me, actually, Einstein and Feynman. So with their principle that if you can't explain it, it doesn't have to be a correct principle, but their principle, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it well yourself. Do you think that principle is true? Does it apply here? Is it different in some sense? What are your thoughts?
Man, 5-year-olds. Did Einstein have a lot of experience with 5-year-olds? Because
I don't want to go there. I don't know what that means.
Like teaching 5-year-olds how to do things, because that seems very difficult. But yeah, like the best coaches, the best poker minds that I've learned from historically are able to make connections, describe things very succinctly in a way that makes you think, wow, it's so obvious. Like, why didn't I think of it? Because it was so obvious. I think that like the best teachers are able to distill things and explain things in such a way that make it, in hindsight, make you kind of feel dumb for not ever thinking of things in that way.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I would agree with that, but at the same time, we can say that there's also something to be said about whether or not some people have the patience to explain something to a 5-year-old, right? So I think like
some things are so complex you can't teach them to a 5-year-old.
You need to listen to Einstein explaining general theory of relativity. Like, he is amazing, like just absolutely phenomenal. And to Richard Feynman for that matter, right?
I'm thinking about like the level of complexity goes up, right? It's like building a house, like being a mechanical engineer, explaining it to a 5-year-old. It's like
but there are basic principles behind that, though, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's specific things that happen again and again, even though you have, microcosm and medium cosm and whatever it is, but you have some basic principles that they're the same for the plumbing and the electricity, like sort of like you have to put an infrastructure, so you have to somehow explain the idea of the infrastructure. You start with the
like foundation.
Exactly.
As you like drill deeper and go more granular, I think things just increase in complexity.
Right. Exactly. But that's not something necessarily that the 5-year-old needs to know in order to understand how houses are built.
That's true.
Yeah. So
like, if they're trying to build a house, then they probably need to know it.
Correct. Exactly. Yes. But if to get the idea, right? So I remember I was when I was a kid, I was flabbergasted how we would get into our car and then we'll travel for 200 miles. I was like, Dad, how do you remember how to go there? And he explained it to me very simply. He said, I don't remember the entire itinerary, right? I really don't. I just know how to go from, I take the entire trip, I split it down to 3 parts. I know how to go in the first part, then the second part, and then the third part. And that made perfect sense to me, right? That's a very simple way to explain to somebody how you remember.
I get older and I realize that the depth of my ignorance is endless. Like, I don't know how electricity works. Yeah, I have no idea how electricity works. When I flip a light on, I know that electricity flows to the light, but I don't know why that makes it come on. And I don't know how batteries work. I have no idea of how the electricity powers the battery and why the juices run out. Just fundamentally, I have no earthly idea how so many things that are just a daily part of my life work.
And to be fair, about 99% of the population is in the same category. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
that's
read about electricity too
yeah.
the other day because I was like, I don't even know how this works. Then I read and I was like, I still don't know how it works. It
It
still
is.
doesn't make sense. And who figured this out that like these electrons, just powered things? Like that's mind blowing to me.
I think it was Faraday, if I don't remember. But it doesn't matter. But yeah, that's
But somebody had to figure it out,
right,
right?
right,
Like
yeah,
how like one human making that breakthrough and making that
right.
connection to me is just mind blowing.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed incredible. Um, so I guess yeah, I promised I'm going to mention the poker example that I had in mind. So just close this for anybody who
Sure.
is OCDing.
Close the loop.
Close the loop. Yeah. So this is basically the ace deuce hand, right? A lot of students, come and say, you know what, Duncan, ace deuce is not a good hand, and that was the hand that we were discussing, if you remember one of the earlier podcasts, right? How
Yep.
most people, it's the most losing hand, even performing worse than seven deuce, just because people are overplaying it. And that's a little bit harder to explain, but it's the same principle as the student who thinks that knights are worse than the
Well,
rooks. People
yeah,
will
I
think
would.
that ace deuce is worse than seven deuce if they look at the data.
Yeah, I think overplaying it, I would state it as like they're just playing it inappropriately.
Right. That's what
Like,
I meant.
yeah, like they're just putting in too much money or doing something that's inappropriate. Like maybe there are situations to play ace deuce that make sense and can make money.
Absolutely.
However, if you mess up and just do things poorly, you're going to lose more money. I mean, I have like many examples of like higher category hands performing worse than lower category of hands because of some property that is not understood well enough by a student that's causing them to lose more money than they should.
Absolutely.
Which is always surprising to me, but it's an interesting thing.
Right. But that's why you're asking that question, right? I mean, that's why you're curious, and you say, why would you do that, right? So that why would you, like, you keep uh again, based on what you said earlier, right? I mean, that's how you would go ahead and ask this type of question. You're
Sure.
probing. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's problem solving
Yeah.
too, right? It's like
Right.
leak identification and then problem solving of like, oh, that's very strange that this is happening. What's the root cause?
Speaking of curiosity, I'm curious, what's your definition of overplaying? Why did you correct me there? What do you have as an idea of overplaying?
I mean, like if the button min raises and you have ace deuce in the big blind, then you can defend. That's like playing it appropriately, right?
Right.
So to me, it was just a matter of like there are times to appropriately play ace deuce, and like it is a v-pippable hand. I don't think that word's in the dictionary either, but it is a v-pippable hand in certain situations. However, if you don't understand the situations, then you're just playing it inappropriately.
Absolutely.
And it could be due to overplaying. It could, like, when I think of overplaying, I think of like generally aggression more so than passivity, but I guess it could be passivity too. Like overplaying could just be defending inappropriately with ace deuce in the same way. So yeah.
Okay, that explains it. So you thought it in terms of aggression instead. Yeah, but I mean it in a more general sense, because I agree with you 100%. Right? I mean, the argument is not fold ace deuce as you fold seven deuce. Otherwise, they would be worth the same. It's just that ace deuce is better. Why is it performing worse? That's basically the question.
Because people are playing it bad.
Exactly. I would just put the word over next to it, but that's like different perspectives.
Yeah. They're messing it up. They're not playing it well.
They're messing it up. So just in closing, if you were to describe for the listeners, just to paint us a picture, specific picture of your ideal student and perhaps the ideal version of yourself as a coach in terms of a story, like imagining a specific person. We can call them Alex if you want, just so we have somebody to talk about. How describe a day in the coaching session, a coaching session between Coach Brad and Alex. So B is coaching A.
To distill it, I guess, as much as possible, they just listen. That's it. Like they just listen. They they're open to having a conversation. They're open to thinking about things differently.
So your shrink is your best student.
I mean, just like, when we cover a topic and we identify a place to upgrade, just listen and execute.
Absolutely.
And don't send me messages over the next 5 days saying that you've tried this thing 8 times and it's gone wrong 6. Like, I don't care, Again, anything can happen over a small sample size. So it's just like trusting that we're arriving at good conclusions and clicking the right buttons in the situation as we trained. Right. And that's really it.
Yeah.
You're laughing over there.
No, I love it. I love it. It's just, like you're making it it's classic. Like, you remind me of the response from last week. Just be better at poker, So you're absolutely right. Of course, it's just
it's just like I want to make progress, right?
Of course.
I'm somebody that wants to move forward. I don't want to be qualifying. I don't want to be like having to prove everything that we talk about again and again and again every coaching session and every day outside of coaching session. Like, we arrived at a conclusion. Execute. If over a long period of time things are going poorly, we'll reinvestigate. We'll look at the data because you're being consistent. You're not changing your strategy. And then we'll make upgrades if necessary. But poker's a big game. These things take time. Like, just there's all kinds of spray over a short period of time. So like, my favorite students are ones that engage their curiosity, ask good questions, are receptive to making upgrades, and that also will like challenge sometimes.
That's right. Exactly. Push back a healthy amount, right? That's you have to.
Right. A healthy amount, right. Not an unhealthy amount. Right. And not on things that are like, it's like the thing that people quote to me in the village all the time, right? Where it's like trying to feed my kids dinner. And I'm like, just eat the broccoli. Like, I swear to you, it's good for you. Like, how many times in my life have I tried to poison you? I've never tried poisoning you. Just do it. It's fucking for your own good health, right? Like that I don't want to convince people to eat the broccoli every coaching session, like, eat it. If you don't like it, then don't eat it. Go find somebody else. I don't care.
Right. No, I mean, there's certainly an element of lack of chemistry, right? If there is lack of chemistry, if people are either, again, pushing back too much or they're not pushing back enough, maybe it's not a good fit, right? In the end of the day,
if something's provable through data, right? And I can say like, raising under the gun with aces makes money. Right. Well, I don't want to raise under the gun. I don't want to raise with aces. Right. Why? Like, this is what we're going to spend energy on? This question? That to me is like, nah, just go ahead.
I think the problem is more on them actually insisting on pushing on an issue than an issue itself. Because if a very good student comes to me with a question like this, I will take it far more seriously than somebody that, like, everything that I say, they're going to say, what if I do this? What if I do this? You know what I mean? Because, like, if somebody who understands the optimal amount of pushing back, and maybe they have a blind spot in there, maybe something is to be revealed by actually see, because maybe they had a epiphany, right? And the classic, it's not the difficult epiphany. Maybe they think, by limp re-raising, I make more money. So Duncan, I understand what you're saying, like raising under the gun, I understand makes money. What if I made more money by limping, right? And this is somebody, again, if it's somebody who's like asking you that same thing every time you say raise with the hand, they say, what if I limped instead?
Why would you say do it? Like, go for it.
Yeah,
whatever.
Exactly. But also, like, you can push back yourself. I mean, you can have a conversation. I
can push back, but if they say it every time, again, I'm not interested in having the same conversation 10 times.
Just to make sure we're on the same page, one of the prefaces of what I said is that, again, this pushback only makes sense to somebody who does it occasionally. Frequently.
In which case, like, great. Like, I'm happy with that. But, if I can just show you that, like, this is going to be the highest performing thing that you can do, and you reject it, then you reject it. Right. I'm trying to show you scientifically. You reject it, okay, we'll move on. Like, I don't want to try to convince you. I don't want to try to convert anybody to anything. You know, I think have conversations with players in the community sometimes, and like, you know, it just turns into like, this is my opinion on a spot, and they're like, I totally disagree. Did you even consider all these other things? And like, yes, I did consider them, and X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh, well, I still think that that's bad. Like, I'll just throw up the shrugging emoji and move on with my life. Like, okay, you think it's bad. It's not my job to convince you. Like,
absolutely. No, that makes sense. And again, it goes back to, you know, people who, because again, that sounds like the person who's closed-minded enough to not listen at all to you at this specific spot, right? You know,
mostly like it's people looking to prove they're right. They want to prove they're right at all costs. And so when confronted with a reality that's different from what they currently believe, instead of being open to an upgrade, they double down on their current belief.
Got it.
And if that is the situation, you know, my parents are conspiracy theorists. I know enough to know that it doesn't matter. Logic.
How do you know?
Logic, data doesn't matter. You don't flip that belief. You can't.
That's right.
So you just don't touch it.
Absolutely. And just to lighten the mood, what are some of the weirdest, you know, like things that people constantly push you back on? Like some of what's your favorite example of something that it can be proven that it's, you know, it's not what they say they are, but they're still pushing you on that, and different
Duncan,
students.
I'm relaxing. You know, I'm relaxing after the success of the Wolves, and making me dredge up my bad.
I was trying to find a funny story, and you're like getting angry over this. Okay.
No, I'm not getting angry. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think one of the best things that I've done is extracted myself from offering public-private coaching. And so the people that I work with on a regular basis, my students, are selected for, you know, very specifically because we work very well together. So I don't really have to deal with that very much anymore.
Right.
I
do have a favorite if you want, so we can.
Yeah. You give me a favorite.
Yeah. So my personal favorite is, and again, this can come from a really good place too, like really bright students. And it's actually difficult to answer too. You have to be careful. When people come to me and say, "What if my opponent is random?" Doesn't that mean that no matter what strategy I choose, it doesn't matter because they're random and they can always do something random, which is completely unexpected? That's my favorite. Yeah, that's my favorite because it's actually a good argument. And of course, the subtlety in that argument, which is not easy to articulate, by the way, the subtlety is that somebody who's totally random, they're actually deterministically random, meaning that because they're random, now you expect them to be unexpected. So they are expected in some sense. So what is expected is that randomness. And when that randomness is expected, now you can deal with it, right? And this is the like how you would explain it in sort of like one or two sentences. Anything that's expected, even the unexpected, can be taken advantage of. I mean, obviously, you know what I mean because you're a poker player, right? But I mean,
I actually haven't ever had anybody ask me that question before. What if somebody's just totally random?
Right. It's a good question, right?
I think so. My response would be different than yours, though. I would just say they're not. Like that would nobody's totally random, right? Because humans are really bad at being random.
Sure, that's also very true. But for the record, like the hypothetical, thought experiment type of like totally random opponent, like you program a computer to be totally random, very easily exploitable. You just raise them every time and randomly they will fold eventually. So it's just very simple because again, you expect them to do something unexpected, and something unexpected means that they randomly will fold, they randomly will call, they will do random things. So you keep raising them until they randomly fold. So
I think too, like just a random, like a lot of it just so depends on
Of course.
what the randomness is. Like, is it just pure randomness? They're just going all in arbitrarily,
Right.
betting, checking, calling, raising, just at whim.
Right.
In which case, that they're probably going to be extremely exploitable.
Right. But why? That's another question. Like, why are they exploitable? Right.
Because their frequencies are going to be out of whack in some way. Because sometimes, you should high frequency bet, but if you're like randomly doing things, then your frequencies just are out of whack, which makes you naturally exploitable.
Why? Because keep in mind, you're a beginner, right? So you're like, okay, so why having, what does it mean to have optimal frequencies, right? I mean, you have to go into the specifics. What does it mean to be out of whack, and why, just being out of whack means you can take advantage of that? Like, what is it exactly that you're taking advantage of?
You're taking advantage of some sort of frequency imbalance. I mean, they have like
that's right.
They check or they bet, right? And if it's random, then it's 50-50. So then when you bet, they're going to 33% of the time fold, 33% call, 33% raise. So, I mean,
and that's the consistency that you take advantage of. What you just described. So you described the consistency, right? So the truly, right? So the truly,
but it has to be like, if it's truly random and they're like rolling, there has to be some sort of frequencies that they're rolling for, right? Absolutely. Because I mean, if they have 3 options and they're all going to be determined equally over time, then it is 33%. So like in this case, in any pot that has like 10 big blinds, I would always bet 1 big blind.
Right. Correct.
With my bluffs, because like, oh, they're just going to fold a third of the time, which is dramatically over folding.
Correct. Exactly. But that goes to show you now that, at that point, then people realize, well, I mean, it's not good to be totally random. So then people are going to start saying, okay, maybe they're not completely random. And now now you give them the answer that you gave earlier. Then they have some patterns. If they have patterns, they can be exploited.
Yeah, but then they're not random anymore.
There you go. But that's right. But even the random, like that's the thing. There is something to that question. Even the random player has consistency. Like being totally random consistently, the consistent part of the randomness is something that can be exploited.
Sure.
And I think that that's something that can be specifically articulated. And by just saying, come on, let me know, who plays random anyway, right? I mean, it's just, we're not addressing the issue of the curious, right? So that's
yeah. I think beginner poker players are very concerned about people just being able to do anything at any time. Right. It's a little bit overwhelming.
Right. Exactly.
But
exactly.
All right. Good
Beautiful
stuff, man.
Absolutely.
Good conversation, as always. Before we dip on out of here, Twitters, all the tweeters,
the
YouTubes, youtube.com/why Alex beats Bobby, BOBBIE, at CBG Podcast on Twitter, greatnessvillage.com. Hop in, join the Philosophical Friday channel. Ask us questions. Duncan loves questions.
I do. I really do. Just go, and then especially on the YouTube channel, go drop a comment, ask questions, anything about, or tell us the opinion. What makes for a good coach? What makes for a good student if you're a coach?
Yeah. And if you disagree, send the message to Duncan.
I love disagreement. I'm gonna lose sleep over it. You're gonna troll me like, why are we find
What's interesting is, like, to me, it's like when there's a when there's a disagreement, I'm just fine letting it go and moving on,
Yes, I'm the opposite. I just want to try to,
You want to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, but I mean, I'm interested also for the book, like, because I'm trying to figure out exactly why disagreements happen and how we can bridge those gaps, especially, with all the political problems and all the issues that plague us. So
yeah, low-hanging fruit is probably shouldn't try to shame people and yell at them to change their mind. I have a feeling that that's maybe the worst tool of influence ever invented by human beings.
Absolutely. But then there is, unfortunately, I just have to respond to that, a why. Why should we shame people? I mean, it's obvious to you and me, but like before somebody accepts to not shame people, they sort of like have to understand.
Go back to the tweet, right? Yeah. The tweet from Nick Howard. Before you can coach somebody, before you can have an impact, they have to know that you care. Right. And by making fun of them, by calling them names, by being adversarial, you're not showing in any way that you care. which will not give you any influence over how this person is thinking, perceiving the world. And so like you do whatever side you're on, whatever cause you're gunning for, harm instead of good.
Or have some meta humility.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Good stuff. See you next week.
Absolutely. Take care, man.
Peace.